Imagine this. You're in New York City, it's 1937, Easter Sunday, and you're heading home for a family dinner.
Sounds pretty idyllic, a nice traditional gathering.
Except when you arrive, you find your family brutally murdered.
Wow, that took a dark turn.
That's the horrific reality that Joe Gideon faced, leading to a case that captivated the nation.
So this is the story of the Gideon family murders.
Exactly, a story filled with twists and turns and a media frenzy that both hindered and helped the investigation.
Sounds like a real-life pulp fiction novel.
It does, doesn't it? And we're going to unpack it all, piecing together the lives of the victims, the suspects, and the killer, using newspaper accounts, police records, and even a first-hand account from the murderer himself.
A first-hand account. Now that's intriguing.
Oh, it gets even more interesting. This case isn't just about a crime, it's about a family navigating the Great Depression, a city captivated by a salacious murder mystery, and a justice system grappling with questions of mental illness and criminal responsibility.
So let's start with the Gideons. Who were they?
The Gideons were immigrant parents, hard-working, but with a strict patriarch, Joe. They had two daughters, Ethel and Ronnie, both trying to find their own way in 1930s New York.
Okay, a classic immigrant family striving for the American dream.
Right, but with underlying tensions. Ethel was ambitious and focused, working at Vanity Fair, while Ronnie, described as a wild soul, became a model for pulp detective magazines.
Ah, the wild child versus the responsible one. That dynamic always adds complexity.
And it played a significant role in this case. The family dynamics were strained, especially with Joe separated from Mary, the mother, yet they still came together for holidays, including Easter Sunday, 1937.
Which makes the discovery of the murders even more tragic.
Absolutely. The crime scene was gruesome. Ronnie was found nude and strangled in her bed. The boarder, Frank Burns, stabbed in his sleep, and Mary hidden under Ronnie's bed.
It sounds like a scene straight out of those pulp magazines Ronnie modeled for.
Chilling, right.
Yeah.
What's even more puzzling is there was no sign of forced entry, the apartment was undisturbed, and the dog did make a sound.
That suggests the killer was someone they knew, someone they trusted.
Precisely. But the physical evidence was limited. A broken soap bar, a missing alarm clock, and a few strands of gray hair. Not much to go on.
So who were the initial suspects?
Well, immediately suspicion fell on Joe, the estranged husband, and Bobby Flowers, Ronnie's ex-boyfriend.
A crime of passion, perhaps.
It seemed like a possibility, but both had solid alibis.
So if not them, then who?
Investigators also looked into former boarders, George Greer and Mary Bayo, but they were eventually dismissed as well.
Dead ends everywhere. It sounds like the police were hitting a wall.
They were, and then came a crucial discovery. Ronnie's diary.
Uh-huh. The mysterious diary filled with men's names we talked about earlier. Did it reveal the killer's identity?
Not directly, but it added another layer of intrigue to the case.
How so?
The diary contained cryptic references to a man Ronnie called B, who seemed to be obsessed with her sister Ethel.
Okay, so now we have a mysterious B who was fixated on Ethel. Was he a suspect?
He became a person of interest, but investigators still struggled to identify him. Meanwhile, Joe Gideon's behavior wasn't helping his case.
What do you mean?
He seemed unemotional, publicly slandered Ronnie's character, and his alibi was shaky at best.
It sounds like grief manifesting in some pretty unfortunate ways.
Possibly, but it definitely painted him in a suspicious light.
I bet the press had a field day with that.
Oh, absolutely. They portrayed him as a cold-hearted killer, fueling public suspicion even further.
So, was Joe subjected to the brutal interrogation tactics of the time?
You bet. He maintained his innocence throughout, but the police weren't buying it.
Yeah.
And then, True Detective magazine enters the scene.
Wait, True Detective, the pulp fiction magazine, what were they doing in a real-life murder investigation?
It's a strange twist, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Initially, they defended Ronnie's reputation against the tabloid slander, but then they went a step further, actively participating in the investigation.
Wow, talk about blurring the lines between fiction and reality. Did their involvement lead anywhere?
Actually, it did. True Detective's investigation ultimately led to Joe's alibi being confirmed.
So the pulp fiction magazine helped clear the prime suspect.
Exactly. Talk about a plot twist you wouldn't find in one of their stories.
So if Joe was innocent, who was this mysterious B, and how did he fit into the picture?
That's where things get even more complicated. The investigation takes us down a rabbit hole of mental illness, obsession, and a deeply troubled past, and that's where we'll pick up next time. It feels like we've been going down a rabbit hole with this case, and just when you think you've got a handle on things, it takes another sharp turn.
Exactly, and with Bob Irwin, it takes us straight into a dark and troubled past. It's important to note his upbringing wasn't exactly a walk in the park.
You're talking about the fanatical Christian cults, right? It's hard to imagine a childhood steeped in that kind of extremism. Do we know how that may have affected him later in life?
Well, it's certainly a factor to consider. Think about the contrast between his religious upbringing and the Gideons' approach to faith. For them, it seemed to offer structure and tradition even if it clashed with their daughters' modern lives.
Right.
For Bob, religion may have been more of a source of fear and repression,
Makes sense.
potentially contributing to his later struggles.
It does make you wonder about the long-lasting impact of such an upbringing. And speaking of struggles, his life seemed to be a constant push and pull between his artistic talent and these violent tendencies. It's almost like he had these two opposing forces battling within him.
It really is a fascinating dichotomy. Here's a man who was praised for his artistic ability, even gaining recognition from respected figures in the art world.
Oh, wow.
Yet he was also prone to these outbursts of violence, unable to control his rage. It makes you wonder, could his art have been an outlet, a way to channel some of that inner turmoil?
That's a really interesting thought. Maybe it was both a release and a reflection of the turmoil within him.
Yeah.
But either way, his relationships, especially with women, were clearly problematic. His obsession with Ethel Gideon is a prime example of that.
Absolutely. And Ronnie's diary entries really shed light on just how intense Bob's fixation on Ethel had become. There's a point where Ronnie even expresses fear for her sister's safety.
Right.
It's chilling to think that those diary entries, intended to help catch the killer, also contained a foreshadowing of his motive.
I know. It's like a tragic irony woven into this whole story. And then there's this whole concept of visualization that Bob subscribed to.
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of a self-help book gone wrong.
Right. It's this idea that you can manifest your desires through sheer willpower. On the surface, it might seem harmless, but when you apply it to someone with Bob's mental state and his inability to deal with rejection, it becomes incredibly dangerous.
Especially when you consider his actions leading up to the murders. It's like there were all these warning signs flashing red,
Yeah.
but no one seemed to see them, or at least no one acted on them.
You're right. The self-harm, his escape from Rockland State Hospital, even that incident with his boss,
Right.
these were all clear indications that something was seriously wrong. And it begs the question, could these tragedies have been prevented?
Yeah.
Was there something more that could have been done to intervene, to address his mental health needs before it escalated to this horrific point?
It's a question that lingers, for sure.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the confession itself. The way he described the murders to the Chicago Tribune, it's both horrifying and bizarre.
You're right. It's chilling how he recounts the events with such a detached, almost matter-of-fact tone.
Right.
He strangles Mary after she asks him to leave, then kills Ronnie to prevent her from identifying him.
Oh, wow.
He even mentions taking the alarm clock because it reminded him of an eye watching him. These specific details, although disturbing, really offer a glimpse into his mental state at the time.
It's those specific details that really get you, isn't it? They're so random, yet they held such significance for him in that moment. They're like pieces of a puzzle that fit together to create this disturbing picture of his psyche.
Uh-huh.
And you can't forget about the broken soap and those gray hairs. Those seemingly insignificant details became crucial clues, revealing a deeper narrative within the crime itself.
Exactly. And while the murders themselves were horrific, you can see a certain twisted logic in his actions.
Oh.
The way he killed Frank Burns to avoid identification, his decision to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty, they all point to a level of awareness, a calculated understanding of the consequences of his actions.
That's the part that's so hard to wrap your head around. He was clearly mentally unstable, but at the same time, he was capable of this level of planning and manipulation.
Yeah.
It's almost as if his sanity was this sliding scale, constantly shifting between madness and calculation.
Precisely. And that duality, that internal struggle between madness and reason, is what makes Bob Irwin such a captivating and unsettling figure.
Right.
It challenges our understanding of criminal responsibility and begs the question, was he truly insane at the time of the murders?
Which brings us to the crux of the trial, right? Was Bob Irwin legally insane when he committed these horrific acts?
Yes, and the legal battle itself was fascinating. The defense argued for insanity, pointing to his documented history of mental illness, his delusional beliefs, and his erratic behavior.
Cool.
But the prosecution countered, emphasizing his calculated actions and his seemingly clear understanding of right and wrong.
It's a classic case of the law trying to grapple with the complexities of mental illness.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between accountability and compassion?
Exactly. And the jury's decision ultimately reflects that ongoing societal struggle.
They found him sane, didn't they?
He did. Bob Irwin was found sane at the time of the murders, which led to his conviction and a lengthy prison sentence. But it's important to note that even the judge had reservations, questioning whether prison was the appropriate setting for someone like Bob. He recognized Bob's mental instability and seemed to grapple with the idea of punishment versus treatment.
And in a strange twist of fate, just a week into his sentence, Bob was transferred to a hospital for the criminally insane. It's almost as if fate itself intervened, recognizing that his case was more complicated than a simple guilty or innocent verdict.
Indeed. It speaks to the limitations of our justice system, particularly when dealing with mental illness.
Right.
It forces us to ask ourselves, are we punishing individuals or are we addressing the root causes of their actions?
Yeah.
Are we seeking justice or are we simply warehousing those who don't fit neatly into our societal definitions of sanity?
Those are heavy questions, for sure. And it's easy to get lost in the legal and philosophical debates surrounding the case, but we can't forget about the human cost of this tragedy. What about Ethel?
Oh, yeah.
She survived, but she lost her entire family. She became the unintended victim of Bob Irwin's twisted obsession.
You're absolutely right. Ethel's story often gets overshadowed by Bob Irwin's dramatic narrative.
Yeah.
But her experience is just as important. Think about the weight of that knowledge, the survivor's guilt she must carry, knowing that she was the intended target, that her family became collateral damage in this horrifying act.
It's a heartbreaking reality that underscores the ripple effect of violence.
Yeah.
It extends far beyond the immediate victims, leaving behind scars that can last a lifetime.
And it highlights the importance of looking beyond the sensational headlines, of recognizing the human stories that lie at the heart of these tragedies.
It's so easy to get caught up in the twists and turns of a case like this, the true crime element of it all. But we have to remember that real lives were lost, forever altered by the actions of one man.
And that in itself is a powerful reminder that while justice may be served, the wounds inflicted by such acts can take a lifetime to heal.
And what about Bob Irwin himself? What became of him?
Well, he spent the rest of his days in that hospital for the criminally insane.
Yeah.
A man forever marked by the tragedy he inflicted, but also by the mental illness that haunted him throughout his life. He eventually died in 1975, his story ending as tragically as it began.
So in the end, was justice truly served?
That's a complex question, isn't it? Bob Irwin was held accountable for his actions, yet he was also a product of a system that struggled to address mental illness effectively. He was both a perpetrator and a victim,
Right.
a figure who embodies the ongoing struggle to balance punishment with compassion, accountability with understanding.
It leaves you with a lot to think about, doesn't it?
Mm.
This case, with all its twists and turns, its legal battles and philosophical dilemmas,
Yeah,
ultimately boils down to a deeply human story.
yeah.
One that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the systems we create.
It's a stark reminder that the pursuit of justice is rarely simple or straightforward. It demands empathy, critical thinking, and a willingness to look beyond the surface to uncover the deeper truths that lie beneath.
And on that note, I think we need to shift gears a bit. We've been so focused on the darker aspects of this case, the violence, the legal proceedings, that we haven't really talked about the media's role in all of this. Remember, this happened back in 1937,
Oh, right.
a time when sensationalism ruled the headlines.
Yeah.
Let's take a closer look at how the press covered the Easter Sunday murders and how their portrayal of the victims, the suspects, and the case itself may have shaped public perception and potentially even influenced the investigation.
You're right. The media landscape was vastly different back then. Let's dive into that next.
Okay, so we've covered the crime, the investigation, the trial, and Bob Irwin's troubled life. Now we need to examine the media's role in shaping this whole narrative.
Right.
Remember, this was 1937, a time when newspapers held immense sway over public opinion.
Absolutely. The media landscape was a completely different beast back then. Newspapers were the primary source of information, and competition was fierce.
Yeah.
Reporters were constantly vying for the most sensational story, the most shocking headline. And the Gideon case, with its blend of family drama, violence, and sexual innuendo, was ripe for exploitation.
I can already picture the headlines. Beautiful model found strangled in love nest. Jealous father suspected in triple murder. It's almost like they took a real-life tragedy and turned it into a pulp fiction novel.
And that's exactly what happened. The press, particularly the tabloids, seized upon the most salacious aspects of the case.
Makes sense.
They painted Ronnie as a promiscuous party girl, highlighting her modeling career for pulp detective magazines and emphasizing the mysterious diary filled with men's names.
Right.
They sensationalized her lifestyle, playing into societal anxieties about women's changing roles in the 1930s.
It's interesting how they used her career against her, almost implying that she somehow deserved what happened to her.
Uh-huh.
It's a classic case of victim blaming, isn't it?
Exactly. And this kind of reporting not only distorted the public's perception of Ronnie, but it also potentially hindered the investigation. Think about it. Joe Gideon, already a strict traditional man, was publicly humiliated by the portrayal of his daughter in the press. It fueled his anger and made him look suspicious, even though he was later cleared.
It's a stark reminder of how powerful the media can be, how their narratives can shape public perception and even influence the course of justice.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the media, there's one publication that played a particularly interesting role in this case. True Detective magazine.
Ah, yes. True Detective. It's fascinating how a pulp fiction magazine, known for its sensationalized crime stories, actually ended up playing a crucial role in a real-life murder investigation.
Talk about life imitating art.
Yeah.
So how did they get involved? Weren't they just another part of the media circus?
Well, on the surface, they might have seemed that way.
Right.
But their connection to Ronnie Gideon went deeper than just exploiting her image for their covers.
Oh.
They actually knew her personally. She had modeled for them on several occasions, and they considered her part of their extended family.
Oh, wow.
So when the tabloids started dragging her name through the mud, they felt compelled to defend her.
So it was a personal mission as much as a journalistic one.
Absolutely. They saw the injustice of the situation, how Ronnie was being unfairly portrayed, and they decided to use their platform to set the record straight. They published articles defending her character, challenging the tabloid narratives, and even conducted their own investigation into the murders.
Wait, they actually investigated the case. That's wild. Did they have any experience with real-life detective work?
Not really, but they were passionate about finding the truth and clearing Ronnie's name. And surprisingly, their involvement proved to be crucial. Their investigation actually helped confirm Joe Gideon's alibi, ultimately leading to his release and shifting the focus onto Bob Irwin.
So in a strange twist of fate, a pulp fiction magazine helped crack a real-life murder case. It's like something out of one of their own stories.
It really is. And it speaks to the unexpected ways in which truth can emerge, how even the most sensationalized forms of media can stumble upon moments of genuine justice. But let's not forget the ethical implications of True Detective's involvement.
Right.
They were, after all, a publication that profited from sensationalizing crime. Their decision to intervene, while commendable in its outcome, also raises questions about their motives and the blurring of lines between entertainment and justice.
That's a great point. It's like they were trying to redeem themselves, to prove that they were more than just purveyors of sensationalism.
Yeah.
And in a sense, they did.
Right.
But it also highlights the inherent contradictions within the media, the constant tension between truth-seeking and profit-making.
And that tension continues to this day. We live in an age of 247 news cycles, social media frenzy, and clickbait headlines. It's more important than ever to be critical consumers of media, to question narratives, and to seek out multiple perspectives. The Easter Sunday murders, with its tangled web of media manipulation, serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that the truth is often elusive and that those who control the narrative hold immense power.
It's a lot to process, for sure. We've gone from a seemingly straightforward murder case to a deep dive into the complexities of mental illness, the media's influence, and the ethical dilemmas surrounding justice. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And like all good deep dives, it leaves us with more questions than answers.
So where do we go from here? What are the key takeaways from this case all these years later?
Well, I think it's a reminder that truth is rarely simple or straightforward. Every story has layers, multiple perspectives, and hidden agendas. It's also a call to be more critical of the narratives we consume, to question the sources of our information, and to resist the allure of sensationalism.
And on a more personal level, it's a story about the enduring power of empathy, the importance of understanding, and the need to recognize the humanity in everyone, even those who commit terrible acts.
Beautifully put. This case, with all its darkness and complexity, ultimately reminds us that the pursuit of justice requires more than just facts and evidence. It demands compassion, critical thinking, and a willingness to grapple with the uncomfortable truths that lie at the heart of the human experience.
On that note, we wrap up our deep dive into the Easter Sunday murders. We hope this exploration has provided you with new insights and perhaps even sparked some challenging conversations.
Absolutely.
We encourage you to continue researching, questioning, and engaging with the complexities of this case and the broader issues it raises.
As always, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We look forward to diving into another fascinating case with you soon.